So we're done Mun, and the next step, and the final step, is getting to Minmus, the tiny, oddly orbited, faraway moon that's orbiting our homeworld Kerbin. And so the spaceship that we're going to use to get there is actually using the large spaceship parts that can hold 3 crew members. And basically, you might find it funny, interesting, how simple this rocket is compared to the last one we just used, because it's basically just this. That's it. Basically, you don't need as many parts because the parts themselves are huge. The large rocket engine has a lot more thrust and thrust vectoring, so I don't need a lot of winglets or SAS modules. And because there's so few parts, the spaceship is really stable, and because it's so heavy, it tends to be stable too. You use a lot of fuel in these fuel tanks, but there's only a few of them because they're so big individually. The lander itself is actually much easier to handle because the landing struts here actually have a spring action to them, and so can shock absorb quite a bit. And yeah, basically it's quite stable and simple, and I just love it. It's ugly, but it gets the job done. So let's see it in action. SAS on, because these are thrust vectoring. Spacebar. I don't really need to use RCS at this time, or to have any winglets or SAS modules. Basically, the only one I have is up top there, as part of the lander. And I think you'll really like this. I forgot about that. Yeah, pro tip, you can't really do those large engines at full throttle. You can only do about 2/3 any higher, and that will happen. So yeah, that's pretty amusing. Yeah, nothing's guaranteed in spaceflight, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing. So you can't really, in my experience, at least with this rocket, you can't really have any higher thrust than 2/3 for these engines, or that. Why that is, I'm not sure. I guess because these things are so powerful, they literally tear the connections between the components apart. One thing I want to mention is these struts. That this thing is the key for this rocket to be so stable, because it pretty much breaks apart immediately if those aren't there. So yeah, it's pretty stable stuff. If you don't do the throttle too high. I think you'll find the lander is a pretty neat design once you see it in action, actually landing back. So I'll do that, full process of that. Basically, that's a fuel tank, that's the module. Got 3 crew members. Bill, Bob, and Jebediah. Those are actually the 3 Kerbal crew members that were in the original version of the game. It was those 3, with Jebediah right in the middle. And basically, this reflects their attitudes. These guys are both worried, and Jebediah is just the thrill master. Okay, so while the rocket is raising, we can discuss the odd orbit of Minmus and what makes it so difficult to get to. As you can see, this is the plane of rotation for the homeworld and the orbit of Mun, and as you can see, Minmus doesn't exactly match up with it. It only crosses that plane at 2 points, right about here and there. Now, it happens to be there now, but by the time we actually orbited there, it would have moved significantly. Same 1/6 orbit rule kind of applies. This is moving much more slowly, but it takes longer to get there, so basically the same rule kind of applies. Now, how we're going to do this is we're going to get a little suborbital flight going, and actually, we're probably at 20 kilometers now. We should start turning. We're going to get a little suborbital flight going, and then we're going to adjust it based on what we see and do it really kind of eyeball it, because there's no real way function in the map screen right now to do it any other way. I want to point out that if you have even a little bit of thrust, it's really easy to move these things, because the thrust vectoring helps you out a lot. Twisting is a different story. They don't help you out with twisting. see, there's really no good solution here. You just pretty much have to eyeball it. These large ship parts are great because, I mean, I'm still in my first stage. No boosters, no nothing, and I'm pretty much achieving orbit just with the first stage alone. And now we're out of fuel for the first stage. I believe it's okay to go full thrust for this, but I'm not entirely sure, so I'm going to play it safe. Wait until that's above 70, and we're good. So how we're going to do this is rotating in the same direction as Mun, and basically it crosses the plane at that point. So we're going to wait until we're at this point in our orbit. And so then we will stick our orbit around here, where it'll be in the general region, and we'll wait until the map function, like feature screen, is going to tell us when we'll actually get into the influence of Minmus. So although the orbit of Minmus is really, really odd, there are 2 points at which you can pretty much use the same approach as you got to Mun to get there. Oh yeah, it's more or less safe to go full thrust on this. I just think the first stage you can't do it because there's so many parts clustered together that I guess they collide in the physics engine. Let's see, how are we doing for fuel? Oh yeah, we're still in our first tank. It's great. Now, as you can see, passing Mun's orbit, it doesn't take very much fuel to actually... Yeah, we could have landed on Mun if we wanted to. Doesn't take very much fuel to actually make it further to Minmus's orbit, which is at 46.4 kilometers. Sorry, 46.4 thousand kilometers. That's not as good as I wanted, but it's in the general neighborhood. Now the map function is not telling me we're going to encounter Mun anytime soon there. So, we are basically going to take some shots in the dark. Hopefully it happens. Now here is where we can widen the orbit this way. So that's what we're going to do. Hopefully we can encounter Mun that way. This map feature is invaluable to see where our orbit's going. I don't know if I'd be able to do it without it. And there we go. An encounter with Minmus. Now we just have to wait. Okay, 5 days into the mission, we finally do it. Okay, so I'm gonna slow down time, and again, standard procedure. Basically the same procedure that we do for Mun, only it was just getting there was the problem. And so we wait until just before the low point, and then we brake. Now the great thing about Minmus is its gravity is so low, it's just a lot easier to land on. We have plenty of fuel left in the stage here. I mean, it's crazy how much fuel we have left. It's actually quite possible to land on Minmus, take off, land somewhere else, and then go home. You have enough fuel to do it. The gravity is so light there. So it actually would be better if we were to land on a light side where there's light. And so that would help us out a lot. So that's what we're going to do. And that's good. And now we brake. And we chase that X back to the center. Perfect. Well, just about perfect. Perfect enough. The two lines of either side of the orbit are pretty indistinguishable at this distance. So we're just going to line it properly here. SAS on. And time warp on. It's not any challenge at all to land on Minmus. Basically, the lower the gravity, the easier everything is. The only challenge was Minmus's odd orbit and getting to it. Let's use up whatever fuel is left, what we can. And detach. It's sad to waste so much fuel, but hey, I guess we were too efficient for our own good. As you can see, the SAS modules of this lander are a lot more stable. Minmus is so much smaller, you can really pick out the curvature even as you're still seeing objects coming toward you from the ground. Actually, this is an opportunity to actually gauge how far away from the surface we are, because the last distance reading we see before it explodes is how far we are from the surface. So about 600 meters. Look at how little fuel we've burned so far. It's ridiculous. You basically want to get the right level of thrust to keep your velocity constant. And there we go. Now, if you thought it was really cool what the jetpacks could do on Mun, you haven't seen the low gravity of Minmus. Basically, I mean, he can jump ridiculously high compared to Minmus. That's just him jumping. He can almost jump over the lander. See, look at how high you can go because of this weak gravity. It's great. There. There they are. The homeworld and Mun. Okay, well, there's also nothing much to do once you've landed on here, so we can get back in our spaceship and go home. Let's pack this up and let's head home. So, Minmus was a little awkward to get to, and it will be a little awkward to get back. So first, we are going to establish where the homeworld is in relation to us. There it is. And we are not really in a position to slingshot straight toward it. So first, we need to establish orbit. And I'll get up to about 10 kilometers at the high point for a cut thrust. And then I'll wait till I get there, and then I'll establish orbit. And we will do what's called an orbital adjustment before we you know, do a big burn that'll get us back home. So what you want to do is basically find out, line up the two planets. Now, it's roughly here is the halfway point between, yeah, we want to pick the point that's, pick a line between this and our homeworld, then 90 degrees. We want to stop thrust around here at that point. Then we can adjust our orbit, moving this end down and that end up until it's lined up with Kerbin, and then we can get to that point and thrust. And that's called an orbital adjustment. How do we do an orbital adjustment? We pick a direction 90 degrees from where we are headed, and we thrust and see what happens. And it looks like I did the right choice. You see how our orbit's moving? Basically, it's moving to become aligned with the homeworld. We can wait until these two dots actually line up. Okay, that is close enough. Then, let's see. The homeworld is right about there. We are going to wait until our spaceship gets there. So, time warp. And now, an orbital boost. Now, you're not going to be able to be so precise that you really get straight onto the planet, but you're going to be able to get precise enough that you'll get in within its gravitational influence, and from there you can adjust your orbit to get back onto the surface. And as you can see, it doesn't take much. Now we want to let this burn a little until this point gets as close to Kerbin as it's going to get. Look at that, we might even get to, like, atmospherically break again. Oh, something happened? An encounter with Mun. We don't want that. So we're gonna have to back off. We're good. Okay. And we are still absolutely amazing for fuel. So, time warp. Okay, so EVA in space. Let's pretend we needed to fix something, and we're going to send Bill out there to do it. And now he's floating in space. Just look at him go. So we press R to activate his jetpack. And the WASD keys work basically, you know, as I expected would. Right, left, forward, back. Up is shift, down is control. As long as you have the fuel, you can get away as far away from the spaceship as you pretty much want. And as long as you have the fuel to get back, it's fine. Once you get the hang of this, it's no big deal. One thing you got to keep in mind is just be patient. You don't need to go very fast. It's a good way to get yourself killed. Whether it comes to being outside your spaceship or commanding it, and flying it itself. Just don't be in a hurry, and think before you do everything. There, now I can tell we've entered the camera changed because we entered the gravitational influence of Kerbin. That's not good. That is what I mean by a time warp. You have to slow down before you think you need to, because now we're on a dangerously escapey course from our home. Because of the Mun. It influenced our orbit in such a way that we shot off into space. But don't worry, we have plenty of fuel and it's easy enough to fix because we're only going 1,000 meters per second. It should be easy enough to fix, however. At first you're not going to see this change very much, but as we get lower, it should be fine. It will be a couple weeks before we get back home now because of this little miscalculation. If Mun doesn't influence us again, shoot us off, never to return. Okay, we're good. Now I think you're going to like this lander design once we get back into the atmosphere. I'm going to go for 45 this time. And time warp. And there's our home. It would be really kind of cool if I could land near mission control. I'm nearly out of fuel though, I'm not going to be able to do that. I want to land on land, but yeah, this will have to do. Because this thing's so heavy, I needed 3 parachutes, but because they're slightly above the center of gravity here, when those things open, this thing will definitely right itself and actually land pretty liftily. And there we go. And that is everything there is to do in this version of Kerbal Space Program so far. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope you learned a thing or two, and I hope this gave you some ideas about what you could do with your spaceship designs.